Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Phantasm II. Now, Phantasm II came out in 1988, and this, of course, is the sequel to the 1979 horror classic Phantasm. Now, Phantasm II is written and directed by Don Coscarelli, who also wrote and directed the first one. Now, a lot of people consider Phantasm II to actually be the best in the Phantasm series. I don't know if I would 100% agree with that. To me, I still hold the first one as being the best in the series, but Phantasm II is definitely a really good sequel. Now, Phantasm II was actually the first Phantasm movie I ever saw. I actually remember I first saw this movie when I was 11 going on 12 years old. It was actually the summer of 2004. This movie was playing on AMC. Like, AMC used to play this movie a lot years ago, and I remember seeing this movie for the first time on AMC back in the summer of 2004, and I remember really liking it, and at that point I haven't seen the first one yet, but I remember really just, like, seeing this movie and the 12-year-old me going, what the fuck is this? Now, for the longest time, this movie was not available on DVD here in the United States, so I ended up getting the first Phantasm movie and then Phantasm 3 and 4 on DVD, but I was always missing the second film, which is kind of ironic given that the second film is also the first one in the series I ever saw, and that was also the last one that I ended up getting on DVD. But then finally in, I think it was 2008 or 2009, Universal, who owns the rights to this movie, released this movie on this crappy little DVD, which I think it only had like a theatrical trailer or something. But a few years ago, Scream Factory ended up releasing a special edition of the movie on DVD, which has an audio commentary and deleted scenes and documentaries on the making of the film. And this DVD also comes with a short film about Abraham Lincoln, where Angus Scrimm actually plays Abraham Lincoln. Now, one of the things that I do like about this movie is this movie doesn't just try to be like a repeat of the first one. This one actually tries to be different from the first one. It essentially does what Aliens did. Like, this one is a very, very different film from the first Phantasm movie. The first Phantasm movie was a horror film. This one is still horror, but there's also a lot of action in this one. Like, this one is essentially an action horror film. Now, the plot of Phantasm II is, it begins where it follows this girl named Liz, who, as it turns out, has a psychic link to the character of Mike, who was the main character of the first film. Now, towards the end of the first movie, it appeared that Reggie got killed, and then Mike and his brother Jody believed that they killed the Toll Man at the end of that movie, but then the movie ends where Mike wakes up, and it appears that the whole movie was just a dream at the end of that movie, and then you realize that it was actually Jody who's dead, and Reggie's still alive, and basically Mike starts to kinda convince himself that maybe it was just a dream, but at the very end of that movie, you see the Toll Man again, and then Mike gets pulled into his closet, and that's how the first movie ended. Like, the first movie ended where it appeared that the Toll Man has won. But in this movie, you find out what happened right after that. It turns out that Reggie managed to save Mike from all the Toll Man's dwarfs, and then Reggie blew up his house with all the dwarfs inside. So then the movie jumps ahead to 10 years later, and you find out that Mike has been spending the last 10 years in a psychiatric hospital. Like, in this movie, it appears that scene in the beginning where Reggie blew up his house never actually happened, or at least Reggie doesn't remember it happening. And that's one of the things that's so interesting about the Phantasm series, is there's a lot of stuff in this series that really is left open to the viewer's interpretation. Like, was that opening scene where Reggie blows up his house just a dream? Or did it actually happen, but did the tall man, like, reverse time or something to make it appear that it never happened? Because it does appear that the tall man is a being who can alter time and space. But in this movie, Mike ends up getting released from the psychiatric hospital, and in the film you realize that he's also having psychic links with this girl Liz. And in the beginning of the film, Reggie still doesn't believe Mike about the tall man, but then Reggie's family ends up getting killed, and that's when Reggie starts to actually believe Mike about the tall man. Now, this is the one thing that I've always wondered about, like, does Reggie just randomly start to believe Mike after his family was killed, or does Reggie also start to remember the events of the first film, because the end of the first film leads you to believe that his memories of what happened in the first film got erased, so it doesn't really explain whether or not Reggie also remembers what happened in the first film. So once Reggie starts to believe Mike, him and Mike end up going out and looking for the tall man so they can destroy the tall man, and throughout the movie Mike is also having these visions of this girl Liz, and eventually they do meet Liz. But that's all I want to say about the plotline of Phantasm II. Now, Phantasm II is an awesome movie. Like, I don't like it as much as the first one, but I do think this is a really, really good sequel. Now, in this film, you also get more of a sense of what the tall man's agenda might actually be, because in this film, you see Mike and Reggie driving through these, like, abandoned towns, and you realize that the tall man actually wiped all these towns out, and it kind of hints that the tall man might actually have a much larger agenda. And in the other Phantasm films which would follow this, you find out that the tall man is actually planning on wiping out the entire world. And in this movie, you actually have some really creepy scenes. Like, there's a scene in this movie where Reggie and Mike see this apparition that looks a little bit like Liz, but it's not actually her, and this mutant caterpillar-looking monster comes out of her back, and it's a really creepy scene in the film. Also, in this movie, there's this priest who had his entire town destroyed by the tall man, and there's a scene in this movie where he confronts the tall man, and then the tall man wraps the guy's crucifix around his neck, and then says to him, "You think when you die, you go to heaven? You come to us." Now, in the film, Reggie Bannister reprises his role as the character of Reggie, and Reggie is freaking amazing in this movie, and what I really like about this movie is they actually kind of turn Reggie into kind of an action hero in this movie. In the first movie, Reggie was really just a side character, but in this movie, he really is like one of the heroes of the movie, and he's a great character. And honestly, the character of Reggie, he's one of my favorite horror movie heroes. Like, he's right up there with the character of Ash from the Evil Dead movies as one of the best horror movie heroes out there. And in the film, Reggie actually uses this 4-barrel shotgun, and it's freaking badass. And that shotgun that he uses actually has become very iconic. Now, in the film, Mike is played by James Lee Gross. Now, originally, I think Don Coscarelli wanted A. Michael Baldwin, who played Mike in the first movie, to play Mike in this film, but Universal, who put this movie out, wanted a working actor to play Mike in this film, and at this point, A. Michael Baldwin wasn't a working actor. But James Lee Gross actually doesn't do a bad job as Mike in this movie. Now, one of the actors who originally auditioned to play Mike in this movie, I shit you not, was actually Brad Pitt. Now, this of course was before Brad Pitt became as big of a name as he is now, but that is really interesting that Brad Pitt at one point may have actually have played Mike in this movie. It really does make you wonder how differently Brad Pitt's career could have turned out if he did end up playing Mike in this film. And in the film, Angus Scrimm reprises his role as the Toll Man, and he is just badass as the Toll Man in this movie. And one of the actors who plays one of the Toll Man's dwarfs in this movie is actually Phil Fondacaro, who is an actor who was in movies like Troll and Bordello of Blood and Ghoulies 2 and Land of the Dead. And in this film, there's actually quite a bit of humor in it, mainly coming from the character of Reggie. Like, Reggie is a really hilarious character. Like, in the movie, before Mike and Reggie actually find Liz, or meet up with Liz, Reggie is still not convinced that Liz is actually real, and she says to Mike, "Mike, come on, I'm still not sure she's not just some wet dream." And there's also a scene in this movie where Mike and Reggie pick up this girl hitchhiking, and right from the beginning, it's so clear that Reggie wants to fuck this girl, and Reggie even says to Mike, Mike, come on, it gets hard on the road. So there is some really funny humor in this film. But yeah, Phantasm II is a badass sequel. I highly recommend this film if you haven't seen it yet. Now, even though there are a lot of references to the first film, I do kind of feel like you can watch this film without necessarily having to see the first film, although I still recommend seeing the first film because the first film is a classic, but I do recommend Phantasm II. It really is a really badass sequel. So yeah, that's my review on Phantasm II, and bye.